I started writing music professionally when I was just about to leave school when I was 18. So that was in the 60s, a long time ago. And from the theatre, I went to television, movies and musicals and opera and all sorts of different musical forms. But I always wanted to keep in touch with telling stories in music because that was always the thing that I loved to do. And I had been doing scoring for film and television for some years before I did a movie called Weatherby, and this is written and directed by David Hare. And in this film, Philip Ridley saw the film and he liked the music, so he asked me to do his film The Reflecting Skin. My agent had a call that somebody wanted to meet me about doing some music, and so I went to a screening of, I think it was a fine cut, a rough cut or fine cut, nearly a fine cut of his film The Reflecting Skin, which I hadn't read, didn't know anything about. I was used to reading scripts before I came into contact with the movie, so I sat in a darkened screening room watching The Reflecting Skin, completely unprepared, and was absolutely blown away by how emotional it was and how disturbing and powerful and individual. And I went off reeling slightly from it and said, well, yes, I would like to work on this. It's quite frightening stuff, but I would like to work on it. And so I wrote the music more or less in a conventional way, in other words, working from a fine cut without any preparation. And he liked the result. We got on very well. And we thought that there might be some way that if we did another movie together, we could bring in songwriting. And he was preparing the film, The Passion of Darkly Noon, and he wanted songs to form a different sort of position in the film. Not to be just stuck on the end, but to be linked thematically in some way, lyrically and musically to the film. So before he'd shot anything, I read the script and we talked about the role of music in it. Before we decided how to do it in any way at all, he and I wrote one song called Who Will Love Me Now? And some of the lines in that relate to lines in the script of the film. A lot of the emotions and the ideas in it are linked to those in Passion of Darkly Noon. And we wrote that song together and decided that we needed a particular sort of very special voice to sing it. And we approached Harvey, PJ Harvey, who I'd never worked with before, and sent her the demo. And she liked the song very much and said she'd like to sing it, which was terrific for us because she's such a wonderful singer and a terrific artist, and she understands very profoundly how words and music function. And she's quite particular about the kind of words and music she will sing, so it's a great compliment when she wants to sing your music and you'll sing your lyrics. So she did that, and having got the song in the bag, we started to talk, Philip and I started to talk further about the role of the music in the film, and he decided that it would be a good idea to write some music and record it before any of the shooting was done. So I went into a recording studio with a legendary engineer called Keith Grant, who had recorded The Reflecting Skin and lots of other things for me. A wonderful orchestral engineer who had a background going all the way back to Whiter Shade of Pale and the great hits of the 60s and things like that. And I wrote and recorded about 20 minutes of music in 2 long sections, which were linked to moods in the film and characters in the film, to Darkly and to Callie. Philip liked the result of those and took them to the location and used them to play to the actors to give an idea of mood from time to time. And I took sections of those melodically and used them in writing the music for the final score. And the temporary music was also used in the rough cuts and the cutting process. So it was a very interesting process as a composer to work on, because you're in at the very beginning of something and you're doing what I was always attracted to with film music, which is helping to tell the story sharing the duty of the narrative with the words and the pictures. Well, it also tells the actors, if it's available there on set and they can put some headphones on and listen to a few seconds of it, it puts them into a mood which is true to the intent of the movie at the time. Whereas if they were just listening to a track by anybody, any singer, they might get a mood, they might get a feeling and the sort of attitude, but it wouldn't come from the same source as the story that they're telling. And I think that's a really interesting way to work. And we wrote the second song, Look What You've Done to My Skin, after we'd got underway with writing the score, after I'd started writing more of the music for the film. Again, it sort of links to Philip Ridley themes, like talking about skin in that particular way. One of his obsessions is the symbolism and function of skin. It keeps me in and it keeps you out, and it protects you, but it also is sensitive and it reveals things and makes you vulnerable. So it all links to Philip Ridley mythology. It's almost always lyrics first, music second. I suppose that's because that's how we met. I've worked with other lyricists, and I still do, where the process can be reversed, and often is, and I produce the music and then the lyricist accommodates around the music. But there's always also some back and forth, even if you're working like I do with Philip, with starting with words and then setting up to music. They always go back and forth, and we discuss. I ask, can we make this a different length, or make that rhythm correspond to that, or maybe it would be good if we had a rhyme here, or can I repeat a chorus here, or should we change the lyrics there? And so we arrive, like you would do with songwriting, at a kind of compromise between words and music. The thing that really stands out with him is that he has a genuine faith in the power of music to tell a story. I have worked with directors who are at the opposite end of the spectrum and don't see it that way. I've also worked with directors who claim that music is very important, but it doesn't seem to come through in the work. It doesn't bear out in the process. It's unusual to be trusted to the extent that Philip did do with the Reflecting Skin and Darkly Noon. And in a way, it's true to the origins of cinema, in that you start out with a team of people, a composer, a writer, cinematographer, and everybody works together, designer, art director, everybody works together alongside each other, and their activities interweave to produce a narrative which they need each other for in order for the collaboration to work. And I think that I was very lucky in film music that I started doing it at a time where really that was the way to work. And before there was any technology to allow you to mix and match, sample, turn things upside down, backwards, take a bit of this and a bit of that, and make snap changes at the last minute. Because that process militates rather against the independence of each individual artist. And so it was striking with Philip that he believed that music had the ability to help tell the story without getting in the way, and that there were times when you should let images and music do the work. The Reflecting Skin was an orchestral score written for strings and percussion and voices, so that is a fairly traditional approach. And Darkly Noon was an entirely electronic score. The only acoustic elements in it are the human voice for the songs, and there's some piano and there's some guitar and some percussion, but all the rest of the instrumentation is electronic, and not everything was played by me and produced by me in the home studio, and then mixed in Keith Grant's studio on wonderful equipment. One thing that's very interesting about that process is that the electronic instruments at the time were evolving quite fast but there were plenty of instruments that did not exist, and plenty that you can only get on eBay at enormous prices now. And I worked with a combination of synthesizers and samplers, which was really quite unusual and an odd combination of old and new. There's a sound at the beginning of the film that after the wind chime that you hear, there's a sort of ping-pong, sort of left-right, back and forth of a plucking sound, which I achieved by sampling a violin, a single violin playing a string, and mapping it across a section of a sampling keyboard so that you could play it as a keyboard instrument, but it sounded almost like a violin, but it had a vulnerable, not a metallic, a more gut-like sound, gut string plucked sound, which had a sort of elemental quality which I thought suited the way that this drama takes place in the forest. It sounded airy and it didn't sound synthesized. But there were also very hard-edged digital synthesizers used at the same time. But the whole thing was mixed through Keith Grant's analog desk, a brain deck desk that he used for the Rolling Stones and Beatles and Trogs and all these things. And the outboard gear through which the signals passed before they were recorded was the most wonderful old valve compressors and equalizers. And the result, I think, has a sort of human quality which you wouldn't have got if you just sat in the room and played those instruments live. The process of recording was very analog. It all went down onto analog tape so that the tape could be driven quite hard to give a warm sound. And the result, I think it's a very human use of electronics. And it somehow comes out as cinematic, I think, rather than small screen. And that was an important element because the film is shot very widescreen, as you know. And when it's properly projected in cinema, the sense of the epic landscape of it is very strong. And I think that's very important in Philip's work, because what he does is he takes private emotions and turns them onto an epic scale. And that makes it very eloquent when it's done in that way. The key to it really is his isolation and the sense that he's trapped inside his private world, which has very intense emotions, is very rich and full of meaning for him. But to us it seems very claustrophobic. And the more he gets involved with the couple, Callie and Clay, the more we begin to see that his worldview conflicts with everybody else's, really. And so his isolation becomes more extreme and more obsessive. I think I was trying to make an emotional but claustrophobic sense of self-obsession. He's obsessed with himself and other people through his own worldview. So it's a sort of combination of self-obsession and obsession with her, with Callie. So I wanted the claustrophobia that you can get from electronics, but I also wanted the sort of airy elements that you can get from just the sparing use of acoustic instruments like the piano and the guitar, and the nylon string guitar, which I played for, which frequently comes in to play that riff that starts the song "Who Will Love Me Now," so that you begin to sense that maybe there is some escape from this world, and though there isn't in the end, but we can live outside that world. And when you get to the end of the movie and the circus troupe arrives, there's a sense that there is an outside world, but it's almost unattainably different and remote from this awful world that Darkley's been inhabiting. I know that Philip wanted one long music section, and I started to write this piece of music, and I knew that percussion was a very important part of it. And the percussion is built up from all sorts of different ingredients, some acoustic and some electronic and some sampled. And one of the things I remember sampling is, there's a moment in the soundtrack where he's in the metal Winnebago caravan in the wood. And I remember one of them was where Grace Zabriskie, who is playing Roxy, is in the Winnebago caravan, and she says of Callie, she's a witch.
Her name's Witch, boy. She's a witch.
And she slams some sort of thermos flask down on the counter of the caravan, and there's a very strong sort of metallic slam to that. And I sampled that and used that as one of the percussion elements in the rhythmic patterns in Darkley's Going Mad section. Plus there's a fly screen which occasionally bangs shut in their house. And I used that quite a few times and built up a rhythm between that and there were some other acoustic sounds which offhand I can't remember, but anyway, that mixed with the drumming, it was clear that the pulse and the drumming and the pure percussive side of it was very important. There is some harmonic stuff that comes in about 3/4 of the way through that very long piece of music, but when I first played it through to Philip, all I had was the percussive element of it, and he really liked it the way it was. So I had originally thought I would build up much more harmonic superstructure on top of it, but he liked the starkness of the percussive thing so much that I kept the other elements to a minimum. And it slowly gets faster and faster over, it's 9 minutes or something, it's a very long piece of music. And it works. And then at the end of the climax of it, there's this sort of horrible silence and then a snatch of the melody of Who Will Love Me Now, without words, but then he says, Who will love me now? Which I hope stays in the audience's mind because they're about to hear Polly singing Who Will Love Me Now a few minutes afterwards.
Who will love me now?
And in a way, that line, Who will love me now, is the core of Darkley's feelings because he feels abandoned, he had to run away. Where he looked for healing and forgiveness, it's just not coming. He became obsessed with Callie, she offers him nothing, and he has nothing left. I always wanted it to be thematically incredibly simple, and I don't really like to have too many themes in one movie story because I don't think they really pay off. In a way, all it needed was a theme which belonged to Darkley and his isolation and obsessiveness. A theme that belonged to Callie, but only really as she appears to Darkley. It's odd how I think the film presents Callie through Darkley's eyes. She has a sort of heightened quality visually. She looks amazingly glamorous and sort of hyper-real, really. So you don't feel that you're just observing somebody who happens to be in the scene. You feel that she's being presented to you as an obsessive object. So the whole idea of themes really has to come from Darkley's head, I think. The outside world doesn't get much of a look in